And I truly do believe that one of the greatest gifts that we can give our dogs is the gift of leadership in the form of guidance. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, as well as I want to give you, I think, probably the most powerful tool that we can have when it comes to figuring out, am I being a good leader to my dog? Let's find out. Welcome to Beyond Obedience, the podcast, where we redefine dog companionship. Hi, I'm Tracy Franken, your guide to build a beautiful bond that transcends traditional training. Flip the script. This is where your dog is the true expert. For dog lovers who crave more than just a pocket full of treats, this is not your typical dog training podcast. This is Beyond Obedience. Hello, and welcome. This is podcast episode number 3, and I am so super excited for all of you that have jumped on, have listened to the podcast, have sent me feedback. Thank you very much. All of that helps. As I say, this is learning. We're learning. This is learning process, and we're going to get better as we go. Today, I actually wanted to talk about, I think the number one thing that I have to talk about, and we kind of alluded to it in the first 2 episodes, this concept of leadership. I talked about the fact that leadership is sometimes a dirty word in people's minds, and how we can reframe it so that it makes sense, especially if you have a negative association with leadership. I like to think of leadership in the form of guidance. You know what? Actually, before I get into this, I have to share with you what happened to me this morning. How my Jack Russell Terrier somehow scammed an extra breakfast out of me this morning. I'm actually almost embarrassed to say that it took me this long to figure out that my husband had in fact fed the dogs this morning. So just to set the scene a little bit, we have 6 dogs in the house. We have 6 dogs in the house, and Irie, one of our dogs, sleeps in my son's room. 4 of the other dogs, is that right? Yes, 4 of the other dogs sleep in my bedroom, and I have 1 dog that is sleeping downstairs with a heater because it's Apollo and he needs extra heat. So he has his own little, we call it his sauna room, which makes it come. I can't sleep in heat like that. So anyway, there is a definite routine and rhythm that we have when it comes to feeding the dogs. And the first thing that I usually do when I get up is I let out my Jack Russell Nike. She runs to her crate. She gets her breakfast. Then I go downstairs to let Apollo out. And while he's out, I clean his room if it needs to be cleaned. I get his stuff ready. I bring him back in. I give him his breakfast. And then I make the other 4 bowls of dog food for the other 4 dogs. Then I go back upstairs. I let out the 3 dogs that are left in my room. I let out Irie from my son's room. They all run downstairs excitingly, go out, they eat their breakfast, they go for their run, all of that good stuff. That's normally what happens. This morning, my husband got up to take my son Ben to work, and I didn't hear him. I didn't hear him at all. I didn't hear him get up. And so when I woke up, I heard that my husband was just leaving. I heard the door shut, and I saw that the dogs were still in my room, but Nike was sitting literally on my chest staring at me. And she started doing the typical dancey thing that she gets really excited when it means like it's morning and it's breakfast. So I was like, oh, I guess Mark didn't feed them this morning. So then I got up. I proceeded to get up. Nike acts exactly the same way. She runs to the door. I let her out. She runs immediately to her crate. I'm like, okay, obviously she hasn't been fed. I prepare her food. I feed her in her crate. I go downstairs. I open the door for Apollo's room and notice that Apollo's room is clean. Apollo's fast asleep. Like, he's not even awake. And I'm like, what is happening? And I was like, well, maybe Mark got up and let Apollo out because he knew that wouldn't disturb me with my sleeping because Apollo's in his own room. And so I was like, okay, fine, I'll just feed the other dogs. So I get all their food ready. Now you have to understand, when I prepare their food, it's like, there is a preparation here. The dogs get kibble. They also get some raw food mixed in, a little bit of warm water. We do the do. So I make up all of these 4 bowls. I go upstairs expecting what I would normally see, which would be the 3 dogs sort of dancing at my door. And as soon as I open the door, they come running out. They run downstairs to where we feed them. And I open up my bedroom door, and much to my surprise, those 3 dogs are sitting at the bed, and they're literally looking at me like, what's up? Nobody's excited. And I thought, uh-oh. And I'm like, well, here's my definite check, because Irie is a banana beans crazy dog. He's the one that I actually have to pay a little bit closer attention to my leadership scorecard. We'll talk about that. I have to pay a little bit closer attention to that. I have to make sure that he's calm. Otherwise, his frantic energy can cause some chaos during feeding time. So he is always asked to sort of wait at the door because he normally tries to burst out the door. So I open up my son's bedroom door only to find Irie literally on his back on my son's bed, fast asleep. And all of a sudden it dawns on me, my husband fed all the dogs this morning. Somehow I slept through it, but he obviously fed all the dogs and put them back in the rooms. And then it dawned on me as I walked back around that my little Jack Russell Terrier, my sweet little Jack Russell Terrier, had scammed me out of another breakfast. So good on you, Nike. She beat me. She did, in fact, figure out how to get 2 breakfasts out of both of the dumb humans that she lives with. So there you go. All right. I wanted to share that because I literally was like, I can't believe I fell for that. And I did. I fell hard for the shenanigans. So, all right. Today we're talking about leadership. It's one of my foundation of relationship frameworks. Okay. I have this thing called the foundation of relationship framework, from which I try to not only tailor my work with other clients and their dogs, but actually how I live with dogs. It is sort of the framework to which is everything that I do with dogs. It's what essentially allows me to live with a large group of dogs harmoniously, I might add, with very little conflict and very little problems, without having to rely on obedience. I have quite often told people I am like the plumber with the leaky faucet. I don't have time to train my dogs. Who has that kind of time? And quite often I don't. And so my dogs are not going to impress you with their rapid downstays or their impressive healing abilities. But, and this is a big but, they are really good dogs. They're just good dogs. They're easy to take. They are easy to walk. They do listen to me most of the time. And I don't have to put a lot of training, traditional training, when it comes to living with my dogs. And this is one of the reasons why I shifted gears quite dramatically many years ago, because I was trying to help people train their dogs. I was training them traditionally. I was teaching people how to walk dogs on a leash. I was teaching people how to teach a sit or a stay or a down. I was teaching people place command. I was doing all of these things. It seemed incredibly disingenuous to me because at the end of the day, none of that was anything that I was doing with my own dogs. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Let me put that out there. Not that there is anything wrong with that. Obedience is teaching English as a second language. You're teaching your dog, when I say this English word, I need you to do this thing. And it's good to have a shared language with your dog. It's very important to have a shared language with your dog. So I'm never, ever telling people no obedience. I'm just saying that there's something to be said about doing this work, this foundation of relationship work that I like to talk about, because it makes everything else easier. If you want to do obedience, it's going to make it easier. If you want to do fun things with your dogs, like rallyo or even agility, this work will make it easier. You'll have a dog that is geared to want to follow you. They're geared to want to spend time with you. They're geared to want to pay attention to you because you do the work that I'm going to discuss in the framework. So the very first foundation block in the foundation of relationship is, in fact, leadership. And it brings up the question, what makes a good leader? What does one have to do to become a good leader to a dog? So I wanted to kind of break this down a little bit because I want to talk about maybe some traditional leadership concepts that we might be familiar with, and then maybe some non-traditional leadership concepts that might help shape your idea of leadership. And at the end of the day, you get to decide your definition of leadership, whatever that means to you. And I actually made notes here. If you're following me on YouTube, I've actually got pieces of paper here because I wanted to make sure that I did this very concisely and I didn't leave anything else. So some traditional concepts of leadership I think, we hear a lot about rules, boundaries, and how does that go? Rules, boundaries, and respect? Rules, boundaries. I know, who is it that says it? There's rules, boundaries, and anyway, rules and boundaries. Let's just talk about rules and boundaries. So this idea that in order to sort of have good leadership, you want to make sure that you have consistency of your rules, you have consistent and defined boundaries for the dogs. And I'm not even saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's kind of one of our go-tos when we think about leadership, right? Rules, boundaries, respect, right? There is this understanding that we want the dogs to respect us. We get respect by being a leader, that sort of thing. Consistency is quite often talked about in the dog training world, being consistent. And that is a great word, and it's a great thing to think about. But, and this is a big but, I think it's important to note that if you're struggling with your dog's behavior and you have a dog trainer saying you just have to be more consistent, there's a good chance you're being consistent. You're just consistently doing something that isn't working for you, right? You're consistently doing the thing that is making the dog do the behavior you don't want them to do. So there is something to be said about consistency, but also, you want to make sure you're consistently doing the right things, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, there's old school concept, this idea that leadership means dominance, that there's hierarchy, all of that stuff. You have to dominate the dog. The dog always has to listen to you, like that kind of strict, forceful kind of an idea that again, I think stems back to more of your own preconceived notions of what a leader is, right? If you've grown up in a very strict household, you went to a very strict school, you might have that idea that that's what leadership is. And if that's the case, we may need to soften the language around it. So let's talk a little bit more about sort of what leadership means to me. The biggest thing for me that leadership means is trust. You have to be trustworthy. And what does that mean to a dog? What does it mean to be trustworthy to a dog? Having trust-based leadership, emphasizing trust in the foundation of your leadership. How does one build trust with a dog? Well, that's going to depend on the dog, isn't it? That's definitely going to depend on the dog and what kind of dog you're working with. But let's talk about how we can kind of reframe leadership and how we can actually talk about sort of a more adaptive. Let's call it adaptive leadership. So we want to highlight exactly how good leaders adapt their approach based on not only just the dog in front of us. We will hear dog trainers talk a lot about that, right? Work with the dog in front of you, right? Meaning there's no one good way to train a dog, right? Just like there's no one good way to teach a child. We need to look at the dog in front of us. We want to emphasize the fact that leadership is not necessarily about such strict control and always being dominant, right? People don't like that word. But instead understand that you're going to adapt the needs to the dog in front of you. And you're going to think about things like the dog's mood or emotion. I've been doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes, sort of looking into dogs' emotions and, the idea of making dogs more optimistic as opposed to pessimistic about situations and stuff like that. Fascinating stuff, and something that we can always learn about. But we want to try to accommodate the dog in front of us and adjust our leadership to meet that dog, to sort of meet the dog where they're at. And quite often, if we're talking about traditional training, we're asking a lot of the dog and not a lot from ourselves, right? I think that's one of my biggest complaints about traditional training. We're asking a lot from the dog. We are asking the dog, first of all, to understand English as a second language. I need you to start to understand that what this word means, and then I got to proof it and whatnot. And I need you to actually, not only understand that word, but understand when I am saying the exact same words, but changing my tonality. Perhaps I'm not in the great mood today, so my come isn't coming out quite as joyful. And you need to understand that that come and that tone still means come, right? You need to understand that sit means the same as sit down, right? Like we are, we are incredibly flawed in our clarity when it comes to teaching our dogs, having them understand these English as a second language. So we put a lot of emphasis on the dog to understand us and what we do, and we don't put as much emphasis on us to adapt to them, right? There's also this idea of being situationally aware. Now, I have this incredible exercise that I do, and I teach it a lot in my program, Relationship Remedy. It's one of my favorite things to do, and it literally is about being aware and being situationally aware and just stopping your training mind, your idea that you have to constantly try to think about how can I get the dog to understand me, but actually take yourself out of that state of mind into more of an observant state of mind and start to be situationally aware of what's going on around you. And then take that one step further and think about it from the dog's perspective, right? In a lot of cases, we kind of forget about almost simplistic things like where the dog's eye line is in relation to the perceived, let's say, threat, right? We look at things, from where we're situated, like standing on our feet, or maybe probably taller. We see it from a different angle. But imagine that same threat, get down low, get down and actually see what the dog is seeing, right? To take those moments to actually be aware of how dogs perceive things, recognizing when the dog is uncomfortable or stressed, and then being able to either affect or influence their behavior through your presence, or if you're unable to do that, know to get out of that environment so that you can change the dog's emotional response. Having that awareness, I always talk about this idea of humans are terrible at actually spotting threats, right? We are so caught up in our own heads. We're thinking about our to-do list. We're thinking about what am I going to make for dinner? We're thinking about the stupid thing my boss said earlier today, especially when we're out on a walk with our dog, right? We take our dog for a walk and we completely check out. We're thinking about all the things that are happening today. And as a result, we miss potential threats in the environment. And there are potential threats everywhere. We're not really paying attention. So when our dog all of a sudden barks or jumps back or is startled, we're not going to look directly, and I'm getting a little bit off track here, but we're not going to look directly at what the potential threat was. We always look at the dog and go, what's with you, right? We're always behind the dog. We're always missing things. And then we wonder why, when we do want to influence our dog's behavior in those situations, when we want to portray this message of, no, we got it, we got your back, we understand, the dog goes, you don't see anything. You miss all of these things that have happened. How can I possibly feel comfortable to follow you, to be positively influenced by your presence here when you're not even paying attention? So situational awareness, something to think about. Decision making, right? Good leaders give the dogs options to make decisions. And I know people are going to, especially when I give you this, the leadership scorecard and that sort of thing, and we're going to talk about that. When I give you that scorecard, you're going to be like, well, I thought it's supposed to always be my decision. It doesn't always have to be your decision. I'm going to leave that for now because we're going to talk about the scorecard near the end. But allowing your dogs to actually make some decisions and make some mistakes. When we have a win, when we're able to actually solve things, there's a sense of pride. And it's no different for dogs, right? Especially when you delight in it, right? They make a mistake, they figure it out, you delight in it. They love it. All right, building confidence in your dogs is another strong, adaptive leadership style, and knowing your dog. It's the one place where I know dog lovers excel, is this knowing their dog. But here's where I see a lot of dog lovers go wrong, is they will, in the presence of a professional, either a dog trainer, a dog behaviorist, or whatnot, they will kind of quiet down when it comes to knowing their dog, right? Because they'll be like, well, that's a professional, so they probably know. No, you know your dog better than anyone. Never let anyone ever tell you you don't know your dog. And because we know our dog's barks, we know our dog's moods, we know our dogs. And one of the things that I really encourage all of the people that work with me is you need to start trusting your gut a little bit more. You need to start speaking up and know that you know your dog, right? So it's one place where I know dog lovers really do excel. And then finally, this is the one that I think people struggle with the most. And this is why I wanted to end on this one when it comes to this idea of adaptive leadership, is shared leadership. I wanted to get this out because I'm going to talk about the leadership scorecard. I'm going to talk about that card and how you can use it to figure out if this is an area where you might be struggling to influence your dog's behavior. It's a great tool for that, but I don't want you to take it too strictly. I don't want you to look at it and be like, this is exactly it, okay? There is this idea of shared leadership. And this happens with groups of dogs as well. Even the most confident dog that one might say, how dare they say the word alpha, but let's say there are some natural born leaders in a group of dogs. Those are the ones that are always calm, no matter what comes their way. They handle everything with ease. They're the ones that tend to be less reactive. They respond instead of react to situations. They're patient, all of those good things. And so within a pack of dogs, we will see this idea of sort of a natural born leader within the pack. But that same dog may step back out of the limelight depending on the situation that is presented to them. And that's something that we don't talk, I think, enough about, right? This idea that there are moments when allowing your dog to take the lead not only helps them to build confidence, it helps them to, it almost empowers them a little bit. It strengthens your bond, but it also shows that you have their back even if you're letting them lead, okay? There are times in dogs' lives where the quote-unquote leader of that group of dogs will step back and allow a better dog that is better suited to handle that situation step forward. Great example of that is if you've seen my video where I talked about going to see what my dog was barking out at the window, and it was my puppy Nike. I think she was like 8 or 9 months old at the time, barking at the window. I went to check. I was making fun of her because I'm like, there's nothing there, you silly thing. Meanwhile, there was one of our horses had escaped and was standing in my backyard. I just couldn't see. I couldn't see her. But where this comes into play is she actually went to the window. She alerted. She called for help. I wasn't much help. She called the other dogs for help. When I opened the door and let her out, she ran out the door. She saw the size of the dog, and she immediately retreated back and was like, someone else needs to take care of that because I'm not going to be able to. Now, and then the other dogs did. They actually took sort of a more forward approach. Then I actually called them back, said, thank you, I'm going to take care of that. The dogs then deferred to me, was like, okay, the humans got this, and everybody calmed down. I went, got the horse, put her back in the field. Everything was fine. But you can see in that moment where the dogs will shift positions. They will change physical leadership, right? Who's going to go first? Who's going to go explore first? Who's going to go check out that threat? They will change which dog is better suited for the situation at hand. It is the whole concept of this idea of being pro-social, and I'm going to talk, there's going to be a podcast about pro-social, this idea that we are better together, right? Together we are stronger. Every sort of person, every dog within this social unit has a place and has strengths and weaknesses, and we are always going to fall to our strengths and sort of weave and flow depending upon the situation. And that, I think, is something that we don't talk enough about. So when we're talking about this concept of leadership, right, it doesn't necessarily have to be such a strict thing in your mind that being a leader means I am on top, I'm dominant, I'm the person that will lead the dog always has to follow me, all of that sort of stuff, because that's not actually true leadership. There are going to become times in your life when you're going to want your dog to take the lead, right? You're going to want that dog to step up when you need it. So by allowing moments to say, hey, you know what, it's your turn. Why don't you go? I'm going to follow you for a little bit. That is not a lack of leadership. That is, in fact, enhanced leadership. Adaptive, enhanced leadership, if that makes sense. So there you go. So that's my little blurb on leadership. Let me know in the comments what you think about that. Maybe add some more to that if you have some other qualities that you think make a good leader. Please be sure to add it in the comments. Let me know, because this is a conversation that you're involved in. All right, let's talk quickly about that leadership scorecard, because I have posted a video about it. People are sort of utilizing it. They're thinking about it. It is something that I have been using for years to help people see whether or not they are dropping the ball in leadership. More importantly, it's to see whether or not you have a dog that is taking advantage of your lack of leadership. And that can be the root cause of problematic behaviors that you're now struggling with. So very simply, this is the leadership scorecard, simply put, and you don't have to actually keep a physical scorecard if you don't want to, but some people do. I've had people ask me about, can I make a physical scorecard? And I may. We're actually kind of noodling around with that. I was like, we could do like a freebie where people could download this concept and also have a scorecard if you wanted to print it out, put it on your fridge. But here are the basic rules of the scorecard, okay? Every single time you do something for your dog, I want you to ask yourself, was that my idea and the dog followed through? Or was it the dog's idea and I followed through? So if it was the dog's idea and you followed through, then the dog scores a point on the leadership scorecard. But if it was your idea and the dog followed through, then you score a point on the leadership scorecard. So simple game. Now here's the caveat to that. This actually applies to every single thing that you do for your dog. And I mean every single thing that you do for your dog. If you move out of space for your dog, the dog scored a point. If the dog is asking to go outside, you get up, you move your feet, the dog scores a point. Now this is based on sort of the way that dogs kind of play this game right from a very, very early age. Puppies learn, how they can manipulate and get their way by utilizing this concept of the leadership scorecard. And essentially for puppies, the rules are very simple. If I get you to move your feet, I scored a point, right? If I'm asking you to play and I play bow and I run away and you chase me, I scored a point on that leadership scorecard. If I jump towards you and you jump out of the way, and I startle you, I scored a point on the leadership scorecard. They play around with this all the time. And the thing is that I've had plenty of people say, I don't really want to do it. You don't have to do the scorecard. You don't have to think about the scorecard. But just know that your dog is, right? This is how they interpret the world. This is how they figure out who gets what and all of that good stuff. It's conversations that they're having with you, whether you are having them or not, right? They only know how to see the world through their canine lens. So now, as I mentioned, this is where sometimes people get a little bit sticky on this because they're like, okay, well, Tracy, you just said that I should be adaptive and I should let the dog lead. Absolutely, you should. There is no perfect scorecard. Okay, we're not looking for a perfect scorecard here. You're not waking up every single day and being like, I'm going to get all the points and my dog is going to get no points. That's not how that works. You aren't going to get all the points. You are going to lose points to your dog. And every single dog has a different scorecard, and every single scorecard is is going to play out differently depending on the dog. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. As I am recording this, one of my newfs is sitting or laying on the floor beside me because she wants nothing more than just to be in my presence all of the time. That is her jam. So for the newfs, because of the type of dog that they are, I don't necessarily have to focus that much on my leadership scorecard. I really don't. If, for example, I let them go first, I let them on my bed. If they ask for affection, I give them affection right away. I don't really pay much attention to that. In contrast to that, I have a Jack Russell. I have a Jack Russell puppy right now, but my Jack Russell that passed away just last year, my older Jack, I had to make sure that I was paying attention to that leadership scorecard every single day. Because that Jack Russell was a very independent breed, high prey drive, obviously. He was a trained ratter and exterminator on our property. And as a result of that, he thought he was all that. I had to constantly watch him and his interactions with other dogs because he didn't have to listen to anybody or any dog. And I love that about him. It was part of his nature. It's what made him the trained killing machine that he was. But if I let my leadership down, if I wasn't paying attention, if I didn't actually make him wait at doors, make him step back out of my space, make sure that he wasn't taking my space on the couch, which, and we could go into this for days, which was a conversation to other dogs, right? It had nothing to do with, he just likes a warm spot or he likes to be where I sit. No, he took my spot as if to say, I sit here now. It was a conversation to other dogs. If I let that go unchecked throughout the day, he would get himself into trouble. He would pick a fight with the biggest, strongest, intact male in my pack for no reason. He would just be like, now I'm going to fight with you. And I would have to actually ask my newfs to be kind. Please do not kill that little Jack Russell while I get him off of you because he's being a ding-dong. Those are the kind of things that happen. And I knew exactly when my leadership had dropped because Zach wasn't listening to me. And it affected my leadership with the other dogs that I allowed him to be that way. Dogs aren't just like seeing how you act with them. They're actually seeing how you act with other dogs. So I had to make sure I was on the ball. My other dogs needed to know that I had Zach, quote unquote, under control. Because if I didn't, somebody had to put him under control, right? Somebody had to. So every single dog that I have has a different scorecard. And every single scorecard depends on the dog that is in front of me. So with that being said, when does the scorecard come into play? Because you're going to be listening. If you're listening to this now, you're going, but you just said that we don't have to be that strict and we don't have to look at it that black and white. Leadership isn't that black and white. Yes, true. Absolutely true. And this is where I always like to remind people that this scorecard comes into play only when it matters. Only when it matters, right? When your dog has a decision to make, right? When that Jack Russell would see a groundhog up on the hill or a deer or whatever, and he would have that, I got to go chase that thing. And I say, hey, nope, come here. That decision, the scorecard's going to come out. He's going to go like, I don't have to listen to you. I've been doing what I want to do for this long. Why would I start to listen to you now? Right? The scorecard would come into play. And the scorecard comes into play whenever you want to influence their dog's behavior. If you have a shy or nervous dog and you want to influence that dog's behavior to say, hey, I got your back, but you haven't been showing that leadership. You have not been, being situationally aware and all of that stuff. You haven't been that person for that dog. They're not going to believe you. You're not going to be able to positively influence that dog's behavior when you're low in points, when you've allowed either that dog to do whatever they want or the other dogs that you live with to do whatever they want. They're not going to believe you. right? So that's why it's important. If you are like me and you have a bunch of really easygoing, high social drive dogs that never give you any trouble, then you don't necessarily have to worry about it. But, and this is the big but, anytime my dogs start blowing off commands, anytime my dogs stop listening to me, anytime I'm not able to effectively influence their dog's behavior, the very first thing I think about, the very first thing I look at is my leadership scorecard. And there are many times in our lives when our leadership scorecard is going to just be low because of life, right? If you are sad, if you are grieving, if you have had a bad day, if you are erratic and crazy, your leadership will tank for that day. For that day. Your leadership on that day will not be great. Doesn't mean it's like that forever. It just means that day, not great. And you know, dogs, and I've mentioned this before. I've talked a lot about this, especially in December with the loss of my dog and I was grieving quite a bit. I knew my leadership was going to be low. I knew I was going to struggle. I knew that was a thing that was going to happen. I took precautions. I wasn't letting my dogs off leash like I normally would. I was like, we got to go back on leashes. You guys aren't going to listen to me. I'm a mess. Why would you follow me? I am a mess. Right? So I took those precautions. I knew my leadership was down. I didn't even have to wait. And and I'll tell this one last story too. It's getting kind of long. This podcast got away on me, but leadership is something that we probably can continuously talk about. But back a few years ago when my father passed away, I had gone back home. I went to his funeral. I came back. I thought I was doing fine. I have video of this, by the way, and I'll share it. I'll share it somewhere. Maybe I'll share it to the email list. I'll share the video. So if you're not on my email list, get on my email list, right? Go to beyondobedience.ca and sign up for the email list, because I'll send fun things like this along. But I actually recorded this because I walked in my room just shortly after I'd come home from my dad's funeral, thinking that I was doing fine. I'm like, I'm holding everything together. I'm doing okay. And when I walked in my room, I looked over, and my new Echo, actually the one that is lying down right next to me right now, was sitting on top of my dresser in my bedroom. She had somehow taken upon herself to jump up on my dresser and sit there. And if you see this video, it literally looks like she doesn't know why she's there. I don't know why she's there. She's never done anything like that before at all. Never done anything like that before. And I literally grabbed my phone and I recorded it because I'm like, clearly I am not doing well. Right? If you ever want to know how you're doing, check out how your dogs are reacting, because I, in that moment, was like, I'm not doing well. I might need to take a break. And so, yeah, I'll see if I can find that video. I'll send it out on the email that goes with this podcast. But yeah, it certainly is a reflection. They reflect back to you how you're doing, especially if they're used to you being strong, if they're used to you being a good, solid leader in their life, the one that guides them, the one that helps give them feedback, the one that recognizes threats, all of that good stuff. When that falls apart, they will fall apart too. Now the difference, and I will say this, the difference between, say, a high social drive dog and maybe a more independent breed is that the high social drive dog just doesn't know, and she's innately unconfident. She's not necessarily a confident dog. So for her, she just kind of fell apart and did something weird. For maybe an independent dog, they may take that opportunity to take over. They may be like, she's out. Someone's got to run this ship. They might take over. So it really does depend on the dog that you're dealing with. So anyway, that I think is it for today. That is leadership in a nutshell. Let's continue this conversation. I think it's the most important. As I say, it is the biggest foundation block in my foundation of relationship framework that I talk about all the time. You'll find it in all of my programs, right? If you're in my program While You Walk, if you're in Chaos to Calm, if you're in Relationship Remedy, we talk about this concept of foundation of relationship, the 3 foundational blocks that I think everybody needs to sort of live, this framework, which just helps everything that you do with your dogs just become easier, no matter what that is. So that's the very first block. I think next week we'll talk about the second block in the foundation of relationship framework, and that is, I'm not going to say it. You'll have to wait till next week. You'll have to wait till next week. I'm not giving away everything in one whole episode. You'll have to wait till next week. All right, everybody, that's it for me for this week. As always, thank you to everybody that is enjoying the podcast. Please share this out with other dog-loving friends. Let them know that I'm here. You can follow me on Facebook at Beyond Obedience. You can also follow me on TikTok at No Trick or Treat Training. Follow me on all the socials. Sign up for that email list. Join the conversation. Let's talk about it. And as always, get out there today and be the person that your dog thinks you are, because your dog thinks that you're amazing, and so do I. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next week. Ciao for now.